Nothing is more American than the pickup truck. It was born here and it runs as deep in American culture as deep fried food and cheap beer. That's why Chevrolet used to say, baseball, apple pie, and Chevrolet in their commercials and use American music icons like Bob Seger or Kid Rock in their Like a Rock and Born Free commercials. Ford joined the chorus with their halfway animated commercials for the F-150, and Dodge recruited the epic voice of Sam Elliott to make you wonder if a Coors Light commercial was on TV again, or if they had a new Ram on the market. Before you question why I made the cutoff for the first segment 1947, let me tell you. Chevrolet released their so-called advanced design trucks that year, and Ford and Dodge released updated models in 1948. Now, how did we get where we are today? The first pickups were born as Ford Model Ts with little more than a metal box put on the back of the chassis. However, these were not factory-built vehicles as the boxes or beds were added by aftermarket manufacturers. Dodge, or the Dodge Brothers as they were called at the time, released their first truck in 1918 by redesigning a World War I ambulance. This was a half-ton truck, meaning it had a payload of 1,000 pounds, and it was updated in 1923 to be a 3/4 ton with a payload of 1,500 pounds. So now you know where those terms come from. The number of tons is roughly equal to the truck's rated payload. These trucks made 35 horsepower out of their 212 cubic inch four-cylinder, which was significantly more than the 24 horsepower the Chevrolet trucks of the same era produced. Speaking of Chevrolet, they also released their first pickups in 1918. However, Chevrolet only sold them as a chassis cowl model until 1928, meaning they had no cab or bed. This left customers to either build their own cab or bed, or buy one from an aftermarket manufacturer, which just goes to show how long the automotive aftermarket has been around. Chevrolet introduced their legendary Stovebolt 6 engine in 1929, somewhat revolutionizing the auto industry as a whole. Ford fired back in 1932 with the introduction of the flathead V8, a legend in its own right. Dodge introduced a six-cylinder in 1928, and when the last truck designed by the original Dodge Brothers company came out in 1929, there were two available six-cylinders producing 63 and 78 horsepower. All three manufacturers made evolutionary changes throughout the early 1930s, but nothing else major happened for a while, likely due to the Great Depression. However, by the late 30s, automakers started rolling out another generation of trucks, including Chevrolet's addition of a 3/4 and 1-ton model. Dodge also made significant changes in 1936 by adding a unique frame to their half-ton trucks and releasing a completely redesigned truck in 1939. Ford trucks largely followed their cars throughout the 30s. In an attempt to speed up this video, I'll skip to what I consider to be the last important innovation in this time period. That is Dodge's Power Wagon that was released to the civilian market in 1946 after faithfully serving the United States in World War II. It was the first factory-produced four-wheel drive light-duty vehicle. Pickups began to diverge from their pure utilitarian purpose after World War II, but trucks from the 50s are something you'd find at Bedrock Motors compared to what is on the market today. Bedrock is the town in the Flintstones. Don't feel bad if you didn't get that reference, because I had to look up the name of the town myself. I think a good way to compare how far trucks have come since the 1950s is to compare how trucks used to have a double low gear, and now they have double overdrive. Granted, this doesn't really mean anything, because these trucks can do everything one back then could do, and then a lot. But it does go to show how they've gone from farm implements to luxury vehicles. Since I left off the last section with Dodge, I'll start this one with it. They released the B-Series trucks in 1948 and quickly outclassed Ford and Chevrolet in terms of cab design and outward visibility. Ford's F-Series came out in 1948, with moderate updates each year from then until the second generation came out in 1953. Some of these updates included moving the gear lever from the floor to the column, becoming a 3-on-the-tree in 1950, as well as a major grille restyling in 1951. Chevrolet's Advanced Design series of trucks came out in 1947, with yearly revisions similar to Ford. Chevy adopted the 3-on-the-tree in 1948, added vent windows in 1951, and the hydromatic automatic transmission became available in 1954. Dodge's B Series was the last of the three to relocate the shifter to the column, which is an act that never made sense to me. Why move the shifter further away from the transmission? Whatever. They did that in 1950 and introduced their own automatic transmission in 1953. The flathead Ford V8 was discontinued after 1953 in favor of the Y-block V8, and the second generation of the F-Series saw the addition of power steering and seatbelts as options. The second-gen F-Series only ran from 1953 to 1956, then the third gen took over until 1960 and saw the introduction of factory four-wheel drive in 1959. The fourth-gen F-Series is the first of the Ford trucks that really resembles a vehicle you could find on a car lot today. The fourth gen also saw the introduction of the unibody truck, which was good for the Ford Falcon, but horrible for something meant to haul anything. After abandoning the unibody truck, Ford introduced a much improved truck chassis in 1965 that would run until 1979. Despite getting rid of a bad body design, Ford didn't do it all right and introduced the twin I-beam front suspension, which, despite its less than stellar reputation, is still in production to this day on Ford work trucks. They did pick a winner in 1964 with the introduction of the 300 cubic inch straight six, which was produced for a whopping 32 years. Over in Bowtie World, the Task Force series of trucks hit the market and the small block Chevy V8 was added as an option in 1955 for all Chevrolet vehicles. Cameo trucks also became available in 1955 and helped pave the way for the Chevy El Camino. 1957 saw a change from the egg crate style grille to fewer larger openings, as well as the introduction of the 283 cubic inch V8. The Apache pickup arrived in 1958 and brought with it the era of quad headlights and a true fleet side bed. Major changes arrived in 1960 when Chevrolet unveiled their C/K series of trucks, with C representing two-wheel drive and K representing four-wheel drive. The Apache-style front end remained through 1961, after which it was replaced by a much boxier and lower-slung fascia with only two headlights. This new generation of trucks had independent front suspension by way of torsion bars until 1963, when coil springs took over. 1963 also brought two new inline sixes, a 230 and a 292. The 327 small block hit the market 2 years later in 1965, and the 250 straight six came out in 1966. The Dodge C Series came out in 1954 and ran until 1960. It featured a few different iterations of the first generation Hemi V8, including the famous 331 Firepower Hemi and the 315 Red Ram. Dodge also got in on the car-like pickups in the late 50s, introducing a swept side in 1957, although it didn't catch on as well as the Cameo. 1961 brought about the Dodge D Series, and with that came several things that were quite revolutionary. Dodge kept the concept of a flat-sided bed on their trucks much like Chevy did, and they also introduced a factory crew cab pickup in 1963. They also introduced a 3-speed automatic transmission in the first generation of the D Series, something Ford and Chevy wouldn't do until 1965 and 67, respectively. You could get almost any engine Chrysler made between 1961 and 65 in these trucks. Unfortunately, the 426 Hemi was not one of those when it came out in 1964. Well, it was only a race engine until 66, but that's a story for another time. 1967 brought about a new generation of pickups for both Ford and Chevrolet, although Dodge updated their line of trucks 2 years prior. The new 5th generation Ford F-Series wasn't a huge departure from the 4th, with most of the underpinnings remaining the same. There were a few changes, including a wider cab and the addition of the 390 big block FE engine. The 6th generation F-Series was launched in 1972 for the 73 model year, and was the last generation of Ford trucks to use the chassis designed in 1965. Several more changes came with this generation, including the transformation of the Bronco from a unique platform to a modified version of the F-Series. The 6th generation F-Series also saw the introduction of an extended cab for the first time in a Ford in 1973, and the F-150 was introduced in 1975. This was a great move for Ford, seeing as they have made the best-selling trucks since 1976. You also see a lot more of these trucks around today than you do Chevrolet trucks at the same time, due in part to Ford's efforts to reduce rust. 1978 saw a redesign for the F-Series, with the grille regaining a much larger opening. Ford unveiled the 7th generation of the F-Series in 1979 based on an all-new chassis. Fuel savings had become such a big deal that Ford went the route of Pontiac drag racers from the 1960s and cut holes in the frame to save weight. A decent idea if all you're doing is running the quarter mile, but not the best if you plan on loading a truck bed full of firewood. This was only done in 1980 and 81 according to Wikipedia, and Ford stopped making Swiss cheese out of their truck frames in 1982. As far as engines go, the first few years of the 7th Gen F-Series played fruit basket turnover and went through several different V8s and a wheezy V6. Things settled down after 1982, however, and you can get an F-Series with a 302 or 351 Windsor V8, the 300 straight 6, or a 460 big block. The F-Series became the first truck to offer optional fuel injection in 1984, and it became standard in 1985 on the 302. The Ford AOD automatic 4-speed transmission also hit the market during the 7th generation of the F-Series. Chevrolet released the 2nd generation of their C and K series trucks in 1967. Standard equipment included a 3 on the tree and either a 250 straight 6 or a 283 small block V8. You could option up to one of several 4-speed sticks or a 350 or 400 turbo 3-speed automatic. The 292 6-banger or a 327 were available as options in 1967, and the 307 small block and 396 big block were added in 1968. The 327 was replaced by the now legendary 350 in 1969, the same year Chevrolet introduced the Blazer. If you're wondering why I haven't mentioned GMC at all, that's because they're almost identical to Chevrolet. That, and this video will be long enough without it. The ubiquitous square-body Chevy trucks came out in 1973, but you're not likely to see an early square-body because they rust quickly. I've heard of one that rusted so badly that one of the bed sides fell off the truck when it was less than 10 years old. That happened in Tennessee. I'd hate to know what happened to these trucks in the Rust Belt. Chevy introduced a new frame for the 3rd gen of the C and K series trucks, and that generation was facelifted in 1981. The facelifted versions are a lot more common on the road today, so I guess they've fixed the rust issues. The 250, 292, and 350 all carried over from the previous generation, as did the 350 and 400 turbo transmissions and the 3 on the tree. Throughout the 14 years of the square body, tons of engines could be had underneath that extra wide hood in addition to the 3 already mentioned, including the underwhelming 305, the 4.3-liter V6, 400 small block, and the enormous 454. A couple diesel engines were available, but they were, not good. The 350 Oldsmobile diesel was the worst of the two and helped ruin the reputation of diesel engines in America. The Detroit diesel 6.2-liter was a little better, but it didn't make any more power than a 454. 1987 saw the advent of electronic fuel injection in Chevrolet trucks in the form of a single throttle body. It was also the last year of this body style in the half-ton trucks. Blazers, Suburbans, and 3/4 and ton trucks remained in the square body generation through 1991. Dodge trucks entered the 2nd generation of the D-Series in 1965 and offered a wide selection of Chrysler's engine catalog as options. Just about everything from the Slant 6 to the 440 big block found its way into Dodge trucks of this era. The 3rd generation D-Series launched in 1972 and introduced independent front suspension to Dodge trucks. Dodge brought their first extended cab to the market in 1973 and introduced a ton of special edition trucks throughout the 1970s, the most famous of which was the Little Red Express. The Little Red Express is well known as being one of the fastest American-made vehicles of the late 70s. The Dodge Ram came out in 1981, but it was mostly just a facelifted version of the final generation of the D-Series. The Slant 6, 318, and 360 all carry it over as well. Fuel injection started replacing carburetors in Dodge Rams in 1988. I originally meant to make this video contain up to the present day, but I ran out of time. There you have it, the first 70-ish years of the American pickup truck. I'll make another video for the next 30 years. Thanks for watching.